What do you get when you combine one piece of framework, half of a teardrop template made out of cardboard, and a piece of sheet metal? I'm going to show you right now, today only on the Fabrication series. Ever since the first two-wheel motorized bicycle came rolling off the floor well over 100 years ago, you can almost guarantee that somebody wanted to take one of those and create it, change it, and make it one of their own. That kind of mentality, that kind of expression, that kind of freedom, if you will, has evolved and created some of the most amazing bikes, motorcycles, choppers, bobbers, baggers, everything that the human eyes have ever seen. And it's one of those things that never ever stops. It's something that has held strong for years and years and years. So today we actually have a semi-familiar motorcycle build in the shop today. That's what we're going to work on right now. And to kind of rewind it a little bit, that's actually the 74 Sportster air cleaner restoration that I did. Was the first video ever launched on the Fabricator series. So I'm actually kind of glad to bring this one back. So what we have today is this piece of framework. It is actually the seat mount. In the front there is a hinge system, and underneath the back we did change it up a little bit because it rides on a rigid frame and it has a little monoshock on the bottom of it. Now I changed this a long time ago, and this seat frame is what we're running off of. We also have our template. This template actually matches up to half of this seat frame. And it was, I would say, carefully carved out. We had to do a lot of creativity in trying to figure out how to blend and match it and also fit the rider's butt. So we're going to take this template, transfer it over onto some sheet metal. We're going to get strong on it, cut it all out, shape it up, and then we're going to roll and figure it out and then find out how we're going to mount it up to this frame to make it look absolutely epic. So let's get started on that. Now, some of this work is actually a little bit reliant upon precision, or at least there has to be a bit of precision with it. With precision comes patience. So some of it's a little bit of skill involved, but it's it's one of those things. It's acquired. The more you use it, the more practice you gain out of it, the better you become. So I'm going to make life a little bit easier when it comes to rolling and bending our sheet metal itself. And what I'd like to do is take this straight edge here and hold it up to this frame, and I'm going to identify where the beginning and the end of my transition is, or where this radius is to where it starts to bend, because otherwise these two sections outside of the radius, to simplify things, they are flat. So we need to find out where they begin and where they end. So we'll take our straight edge and we'll hold it up here and just run it along here, and where you can start to see light come through on the other side, that's the beginning of our radius. So what I'm going to do is hold it up here, and right about the point where I see light on the other side, or where it starts to transition, I'm going to pull it back to where it's flat again, and we're going to make our mark. We'll do the same thing on the other side, and that will identify where the termination of this radius is. So with these two marks here, we have identified where the metal needs to actually be bent. And what we'll do is translate these two marks onto our template, and when we translate the marks from the template onto the flat sheet metal, we'll be able to note where that radius needs to be. That'll make it a little bit easier fit for when we actually get to roll forming this. So I put some tape on the inside here that, one, strengthens up the edge, and two, makes my marks just a little bit more visible. I'm going to hold our template up here. I'm going to leave just a little bit left over on the top here for possibly welding and upholstery, and same thing on the opposite side here, and the front side of it, we'll leave a little bit there. And I'm going to form this template to where it needs to be. I'm going to kind of hold it up and figure out, yeah, that's about where I like it. And then we're going to translate this line here and this line here onto the template. So now when we go trace that out, we can actually figure out where we need to actually put the roll for the actual seat itself when we stick it in the slip roller. Now getting it translated over onto the sheet metal itself, that's no big deal. That's very, very simple. So we're going to hold it up here. I'm going to make a center line reference. One here, one here. We're going to note
where our slip roll reference is, where our radius line is. I'm going to hold it nice and steady here and trace around. Now, one key element here to tracing everything out is to not let your hand off of the template, because it might end up shifting and it might end up moving. And that is kind of a pain in the butt to get it all lined back up to where it needs to be if you let it slip. So make sure you have a nice firm grip on it. And there's one side. So we need to flip this over, line all this back up once more. As soon as I'm sure that I like where it's sitting, trace it out once more. There is our seat pan. Make my radius references. And there we go. Now for the initial cutting and shape of this seat pan, I'm going to use my double cuts, but after we get this rough cut out, I said there involves just a little bit of precision, and that's where we're going to get strong and grab our tin snips and actually cut along the line right where it needs to be. So just to get this rough shape, start with the double cuts. When it comes to cutting this out here, I'm just kind of following along that line, and I'm taking my time here. I'm letting the sheet metal stay in the throat of the actual snips itself, and I'm not making a complete cut all the way down. And the reason why is because when you actually slice it all the way down and then reposition, one, you get meat hooks, which will tear your skin alive, and two, you actually get a lot of imperfections and a lot of waves and stuff that you actually have to straighten out in the sheet metal itself. So this, like I said, patience. Just sit here and cut it out little by little while you're getting strong with your tin snips. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly what I want to do with the front section, if I just want to round it over or what I want to do. So I'm going to make just a little bit of a reference mark right here on the center of it. That little tiny notch right there will tell me about where it's supposed to be. And of course, if this washes away here, I'll end up marking those too. So again, we'll just very patiently get strong here. And the idea is to make this in one continuous cut without letting go and without restarting again. One hand got to work out. So now I'm going to take my grinder and just kind of clean up these edges just a little bit. Some more than a flat wheel on the edge of my grinder. Now again, as I always say, you can't take too much metal off of here, so what we're going to do is let the flap disc do all the work, not your muscles. Now if you do this right after you cut it with the tin snips and your arm is already practically dead after running that entire continuous cut there, then you should have no problem doing little by little, just kind of making this take shape. Not bad. So let's go form it up. Alrighty, so I'm kind of inspired by old school farm tractor seats, so I'm going to try and incorporate some of that design into this motorcycle seat. I think it'll actually work well with the build that we're doing here. So I already took the measure of this one. It's actually 2.5 inches worth of that radius that we actually have to use on here. So I'm going to make sure that this is centered or even across. Take a quick measurement there. Everything matches up nicely. I'm going to hold down really tight, and I'm going to extend these markings on here to note where everything goes. I'm also going to run a line down the center of it for reference, so that way I can differentiate between one side and the other. Hold it up here. Use a straight edge. Now I pulled this straight edge just out of sheet metal from my cut pile. You can do the same if you want. You can use a giant ruler or whatever you have. Doesn't really matter as long as it's straight, and you can either draw or scribe a nice straight line out of it. Sometimes you don't really need fancy stuff for it, and just the simple will do. So I want to run a couple of dimple dies in here. Possibly, maybe I can get 3 on each side. I'm definitely not going to place them in the sections where the radius needs to go. So what I'm going to do is kind of measure all this out in here and try and figure about, you know, maybe where I can fit a dimple die or 2. So let's see, we have about 3 1/4 inches that way. We have roughly somewhere about 5 or so in here. So let's go about 2 1/2 inches in on each side. And I'm literally just kind of winging this. I'm making this up as I go along here in this video. Nothing really wrong with that. You know, at the end of the day, if I run all this and I check it all out and be like, oh, you know what, that doesn't fit, you know, screw it. I just, you know, I'll throw it away and try another again. Just do it all over again, no big deal. We'll go 1 3/4 this way. We'll go 1 3/4 over here. That might not fit a dimple die. Let's see. Here's an 1 1/4 dimple die, and if I kind of center it up here and look at it and be like, yeah, you know what, that probably doesn't fit the way I want it to. Maybe I want to move it over just a little bit, give it just a little bit more area here. So I'll hold this up here. I like its positioning vertically here, but on the this axis over here, I don't really like how far out it is. So I'm just going to draw it back just a little bit. Let's maybe I'll just hold this up here and kind of see about where I give myself a good visual reference here about where do I want to place this. Let's drop it back a 3/4 inch. Get to a point where I can see here, 3/4 inch there. Continue this line here. We're not going to use that one anymore. Another 3/4 inch that way. Not going to use this line anymore. So this placement right here, that looks a lot better. That I like that. Okay, so let's do the same thing down here. Maybe we can place a couple more of them. Bring my 1 1/2 dimple die over here. Yeah, that should look pretty good. Maybe we'll put another one right up here. That should look pretty good. So let's do that. Let's say I want to stick one right about here. We're gonna wing this here. Draw that one out there. Now we'll try to measure out about where it is, so we can translate that to the other side. This is roughly 1 3/4 this way, and let's say about 2 3/8 inch that way. So we'll measure on this side 2 3/8 inch. It's about there. And we said that was 1 3/4 that way. Now we have 2 sections there. Let's measure this one out. It's about 4 3/4 inch down. And this side is about, oh, let's go, yeah, 1 3/8. That'll work. 1 3/8 here. 1 3/8 here. And we said that one was 4 3/4 inch down. So we'll go 4 3/4 inch. There. Now there's the location for all of our dimple dies. Now I do like to make sure that when I'm doing holes with the hole saw, I like to clamp it down to say like a board or something to keep the pilot bit of the actual hole saw itself stable, so we get a nice clean cut hole. Got the holes cut out, we have them all cleaned up. Now to get this radius in here, we're going to use our slip roller. Now this machine here, you can pick up one of these relatively inexpensive. It's a combination brake shear and slip roll. Now it'll do some of just about everything you have to do. I mean, we're working with 18 gauge today, but it's not really meant to do that. So I mean, to get
piece to break entirely across this way, or one piece of something thick or heavy to do, you know, one roll with. It's, you know, it's a little tough, but for something small like this, it'll absolutely work. So what we're going to do is load it into the bender, or in the slip roller. I'm going to take this, and the start of our bend is going to be right about where these lines are. We made our lines of reference. So start at the top of these slip rolls right here. And what I'm going to do is kind of line it up to where it's right on there, and then I'm going to crank down the top roller. This is going to start putting some pressure and start bending it right off the get-go. In fact, you can actually start to see it form little by little. Once we have it on there pretty tight, start rolling, start working it. I'm only going to go to the point where I can see it. That same line up top here, which is the end of our termination point, just barely clears underneath that roll. So we're going to work it back and forth just a little bit here, try and iron it out, make it nice and even as possible. About where the point where I think that's pretty close, that it might actually work. I'm going to take it out of the slip roll. I'm going to hold it up to our frame. That's about dead on. So with that roll form complete, we're pretty much dead on where we need to be. We can actually start shaping and increasing the structure of this seat. And we're going to do that by using the dimple dies. And of course, I'm going to show you another really cool trick for some awesome home solution sheet metal forming. Now, in the subject of sheet metal forming, if you don't have a combination brake shear, slip roll, or roll former, or anything like that, what can you use? Well, the answer is you can take something round, cylindrical, tube, pipe, whatever you have laying around the garage, and you can actually sit there and force it and work it over there. Give it a few, taps with a hammer, whatever the case is. With a little bit of patience and some consistency out of it, you'll actually see that it'll form, it'll actually get where it needs to be. So now we have this done, let's get these stamped out and we'll start forming the rest of it. So I mentioned earlier that I'm trying to do something similar to a tractor style seat, like an old tractor, or kind of like, something you'd find on a farm, something kind of unique. So that's why we ended up going with the dimple dies on it. And of course, we're gonna have the nice frame underneath. It's hardly seen and whatnot. But by itself, just the steel alone, without any reinforcement, even with the dimple dies, is not quite strong enough. With it being on the frame, yes, that definitely strengthens it up, but around the edges and whatnot, it's not that strong. Not to mention, it's gonna cut into the rider's thighs a little bit if we just leave a raw edge on here. So we're gonna have to kind of form all of this and make it blend quite nicely. So all I've really done here is just set up one of my my dollies in my vise here, and I'm going around and flattening and forming that edge over. We're trying to make it nice and uniform and clean, neat, so that way it actually comes out structurally sound, more sound, and it kind of looks like a like the old style tractor seat. So to do this properly, it just takes a lot of patience. Okay, what you want to do is set it up, try to get a very uniform edge, and just lightly tap it over. Nice and easy. We're looking for a nice uniform line on there. Just going to slowly work it over. Now in this area right here, we can kind of see where I went just a little bit too much, and then over on this side, I'm right along with that line. So what you'll end up doing is taking it, placing it back on a nice even surface, and just tapping that back out. Now I won't sugarcoat this. It definitely takes a lot of patience, and you really need to exercise that amount of patience to do this. Now there's a couple of easier ways to do this. You can definitely use a roll former, an edge former, a bead roller. There's all kinds of neat little tools, but again, this way kind of, it helps develop your skills a little bit. And so that way you're not always reliant upon a machine. Just gonna slowly start edging it over. Nice and easy. Just carefully work that edge over. Just where we can see this line right here is even throughout the entire piece.
That's what we're shooting for, and this is the first few taps of it that you're getting deformation out of the metal. That's all we're aiming for. Just a nice uniform line. Now to try and straighten this edge and clean it up a little bit, I've switched over to the top or the side of this dolly over here because there's two radiuses on it, so they don't necessarily come to a point or a nice sharp edge. That'll help me form it just a little bit better as I go around here. Of course, I added just a little bit more leverage to the hammer here and give it just a little bit more solid of a smack on it, so that way it forms in there nicely. You see it slowly come around. That's a much better looking edge. That's about a finished edge right there. So we'll just keep on working it. This allows me to change it little by little as we go along as well. So keep working it. Now when it comes to this section inside of this radius right here, you notice that our hammer is just a little bit too big, or it's actually about the same size as that radius. And what would happen if we were to start smacking this down, we'd have nothing but a bunch of indentations around where it actually is. So you might wonder how are we actually going to get that banged out and get that nice clean radius edge like we did on this side here. And the answer to that is we're going to use a small ball peen, and we're going to very carefully work it over just the same way we did with everything else. But with the ball peen, we're going to go just a little bit easier, take a little bit more time, and focus on where our edge is and how we're going to roll that. Nice and easy. Slowly work it over. Now that we have that edge formed, we can stick it once again on the side here, and this is where we're going to iron it all out. It's all slowly starting to come together. Now this is just a little bit fatter over on this edge, so we're going to have to kind of really focus it in there and give it a few pretty solid taps to get that to come out right. Form it over that edge. Now we're just going to go over and clean up these edges here using the flat disc on the end of the grinder. Of course, you don't want to dig in and take too much metal off. Otherwise you're going to end up with a seat that does bend when you just went to all of that work and effort to make it not bend easily. So just gonna let the flat disc do all the work, not our muscles. Now what the grinder essentially just did for us was kind of highlight all of the areas in which we need to straighten out or kind of maintain just a little bit better, or get maybe a sharper edge, maybe a little bit less of an edge. And all these little spots you can see where it kind of waves and it kind of dips and whatnot, and depending on which light you hold it in or what angle you stare at it at, it will kind of be able to tell you exactly what you need to do. So now you can see that after we have all of this bent and formed and whatnot, this is a lot more difficult to twist, flex, contort, or anything like that. So once it sits on the frame, it's going to be a lot better. But that's after we actually go back and straighten all this out again. So what I did was rotate my dolly and my my vise here to the more radiused edge, the one that we were working on when we placed it on top. So this time we're going to place it in front of us so we get that nice, clean, sharp edge on it. We're going to slowly come in here and iron all of this out very lightly. So, with the pan all banged out, cleaned up, and pretty much ready to go, we're going to take it and attach it to the frame. Now, I did mention before I want to do something very, very clever and kind of old school when it comes to actually attaching this, but at the same time, I'm going to cheat to make my life just a little bit easier. So we're going to attach the frame
to the actual seat pan itself with a couple of gigantic locking C-clamps here. Now, one thing I like to make sure is that the center section right here actually stays put and attached to the seat, and I'll show you why in a few minutes here, as soon as we get this all lined up. Drop a couple of tacks down on here and make sure that the seat stays right where it needs to. Alright, so since we removed the center line and reference marks, we actually have to add one again. And of course we did base our dimple die holes off of that center line. So it's safe to say that if we were to measure between these two dimple holes, we could actually come up with our halfway point, which will be our center line, which we can mark back out here. And I'm going to drill a whole bunch of 3/16" holes in order to get the rivets in there. So let's take a measurement. We have a 2-inch width here, so half of that is 1 inch. I'm going to set my caliper up to 1 inch, lock it down, place it right on the inside, and I'm just going to scribe a little line. And I can mark that with my marker. And do the same thing up front here. This measures out to 1.5 inches, so we'll go to 3/4 of an inch. And do another little scribe here. There's my center line. Now, what I need to do is make a mark every 1 inch on this seat pan in order to find out where I'm going to place my rivets, because I want to do rivets right down the center of it to make it look like that's actually what's holding it onto the frame, even though I welded it. Now, it's very difficult to take a tape measure and lay it up here and say, you know, this is where we want everything, because it's, you know, it just doesn't have that contour and that form as nice as I'd like it. So we're going to kind of rely on my old friend here, masking tape. We're going to lay this out right across the table. We're going to measure. I want to do 1 inch increments across the entire piece. We'll start at the 2-inch mark, I guess. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I believe that seat pan's probably about 16, 17 inches total. Just by looking at it, it's an educated guess, but you know what, we'll mark the heck out of it. Let's go for it. Let's just keep on marking it all the way up there, and I'll assume that everything will be good to go. I'm going to extend these lines here, just out to the edge. Yeah, they're not going to be 100%. You definitely want to keep them as close as possible, but you know, if they're off by a very small fraction, you know, hey, don't worry about it. I'm going to bring my seat pan back up here, and I'm going to start my rivets from a 1/2 inch down up top. Actually, you know what, let's go with 3/4 of an inch. Kind of even it out, because there's not a whole lot of metal, and I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do on the front here. If I'm going to keep it at a point or if I'm going to round it downward. I haven't decided yet. I think once I put it on the bike and look at it, then I'll probably know then. I'll make my decision then. Of course, I'll talk to my customer and see what he thinks. So we'll start with that first line, referencing on my center line. Set this up again on my center line down at the bottom. And run this right up to the center line of the seat here. Just going to wrap that around. Get it nice and tight so it doesn't move on me. So right here at the edge, we have a perfectly straight center line. Now, just in case the tape falls off, the marker line should stay, and that's what we want. Now, I know that roughly right about here is about where the seat frame itself ended for this nose, because I haven't made the decision on that one. So I'm going to start with here, and we're going to trace all of our 1 inch increments. Translate all of these over onto the sheet metal. Of course, that one's already there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 rivets that we're going to smash into this thing old school style. Take my tape off of there, and we'll get to drilling. Now, I ultimately wish to make my drilling experience just a little bit easier, so I purchased a brand new 3/16 drill bit just for drilling these holes out. Now, I'm actually playing safety on these ones, and I'm installing my Clicos just to hold everything in place. And the reason why is because every single time you drill through and it kind of lifts up and separates those two pieces of sheet metal on there, we want them to actually stay flat in there, not let a lot of the chips actually get in between the two pieces there. So I'm just adding the Clicos, just, you know, doesn't hurt anything to have them on there. Have those drilled. Let's pull these Clicos real quick. Make sure that I don't have any kind of junk stuck up in there. Really don't want any of that. That looks pretty clean. Pretty clean. We were going to take some parts cleaner here. And I'm going to prep this metal underneath it. I'm just going to brush it actually. Now, I don't know what the actual finish is supposed to be on this one. We haven't decided yet whether it's going to get painted or polished or, well, really any of it. We don't really know yet. So, in the meantime, I'm just going to hit it with the Scotch-Brite. Just kind of give it that uniformity, nice clean look. And then we're going to slap our rivets in it. Let's get this cleaned off real quick. Nice, clean, bright metal. Well, in this case, brushed. So, these are rivets. Now, they're not the typical rivets that everybody's kind of used to. They're actually old school rivets. They actually have to be forced, forged, pounded, banged in, or even squeezed if you have a rivet squeezer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of brush each one of these up here real quick. Just kind of brighten them. Give them a little bit of contrast. Fill all 16 of these holes. And each one of these is going to have to get forged one by one until they're all installed. All right. Now, I'm not going to lie, did I really need to put all of those in there? No. I'm actually just very, very anxious to see the contrast on here and have a look at it as soon as they're all installed. So, just a little impatient, but we do have to drive them all in one by one in order to actually get them to fit and finish in there. So, before we actually get to actually driving these in, we're going to have to go test fit it on the bike itself, because you know, let's just face it, these brass rivets, the time it takes to drive these in and the cost of the rivets themselves, significantly more expensive than the pop rivets. So I want to do a test fit on the bike first to make sure that yes, this fits, the customer's happy, his butt fits on it where it needs to be, it fits with the rest of the bike, and all the rest of that good stuff. So we're going to leave this in, then we're going to go take it across town and go test fit it and check it out and see how we like it. So before we drive those in, let's go get that taken care of. Alright, so get this hooked up in here, have a look at it. Fits beautifully. I already did a rider check, his butt fits in it great, but the reason why we didn't pound these rivets down is, well, just in case we needed to make a change. Now the back section of this looks great. It matches, it flows, it sits exactly where we were thinking that it was going to go, but the front section of it's just a little bit too new school, having that point on it. So thankfully we didn't smash all these rivets down yet, and the more I look at this, I think we're going to end up doing a nose chop and actually rounding this over, and that'll better match the contours and the shapes of the actual bike itself. So what we're going to do is take this back off, roll back over to the shop, and then we'll do a nose chop on this piece. Right, so after fitting it, we can work on this nose chop here. Now the idea here is just to take off enough to get a nice radius and kind of get rid of this point here. And we're going to have to do the same thing as we did before, except we need something to kind of trace and give a nice little radius. So I just kind of poked around here, and of course I see my little rivet tray here has a 3-inch diameter on it. So this actually should work out fine. You know, like I said, I was just kind of winging it before anyway, so
what I'm gonna do is hold it flush, kind of around where these edges are, where it rounds over. I'm just gonna trace this out and give myself a visual here about where it's gonna fold over. And this will be the outside section of it, so everything's gonna fold over about this far away here. So we're just gonna kind of trace this out by hand, just providing a decent distance here. So since we welded before on this front side here, this is obviously going to get cut off. So I'm going to need something to kind of hold everything in place while I slice it all out. So I'm going to take my clicos here and just kind of fasten them in. Hold it nice and tight. And while I put my gloves on, I've already got my grinder outfitted with the cutoff wheel. We're just going to slice this outside area over here, and then we're going to have to flip it over and slice out underneath. Not too far away from where that hole is. In fact, I'm gonna mark this out so that way I know about where I'm gonna cut. Because we still have to use this hole here for that last rivet to hold it down. And of course I'm gonna weld this back on as soon as I get that set. So let's get this cut off real quick. All that out of the way, we're just going to kind of round this over nice and easy like with the flap disc. That's just for general shape. Nothing too extreme, nothing too difficult to do. Just a little bit better shape so we can get it over onto the dolly again and start rounding this over. Of course, the same way it was done before. Slowly start working that metal over. Only up until we get that nice, clean, even nose on it. The more that I work this over, I kind of like the fact that it's not going with the full radius. So actually what I'm going to do is I might just leave that there and see if we can kind of clean this up, straighten this this radius out here, this transition where it tangents in there. So actually, I'm going to grab the flap disc real quick and round that off, and we'll see how well it looks. You know what, that's pretty clean actually. So I'm just going to tweak it a little bit, get it kind of cleaned up here, and then we'll start driving the rivets in there. I kind of like that. It's not as extreme as the sides there. So let me get this cleaned up and finished, and we'll get the rivets in. All right, so now it's time to drive in some rivets. Of course, I mentioned before that these are the old-fashioned rivets, and they're not like your conventional pop rivet. They're going to actually have to be pressed and squeezed in there and kind of smashed in together. Now, I'm setting it up with my press here to make it just a little bit easier for me to do and a little less time consuming, but all I basically did was drilled out the top section in the same diameter as the head of the rivet. So as it sits inside of there, it won't move and it won't smash or deform the rivet in a significant amount. It won't completely destroy it. It might get a little scratched and whatnot, but that's okay, we can fix that. The bottom section here has been countersunk slightly so that the stem of the rivet actually sits inside of there, and when it presses down together it will squeeze it, deform the section that is not sticking inside of the two rivet drivers, and then it will actually smash and hold everything all together. Now since these are mostly decoration, just this little amount will do here. What we're going to do here is load up a rivet, place the head of it in the countersink, place the stem of it in the countersink on this side of the driver. Just kind of load it up in the press here. We get a little preload on it. Get it lined up just right. It's a little tricky, especially if you only have two hands and you're not using anybody else here to help you out. Once I have it set right where I want it, I'll start pressing down and see if we can get these to set. Doesn't take a whole lot. Now there's one. 14 more to go. Now, in the event that you do not have the press or whatever the case is, you can, you grab a big hammer and a couple of extra hands to help you out while you hold it and whatnot. But
That's just one option. They do offer, lots of companies make rivet squeezers, which will actually drive these and make them nice and even on both sides and whatnot. But the only problem with that is accessibility, where the throat of the squeezer itself is not always able to cope with doing something like this. Now, if it was around the edges and whatnot, then a rivet squeezer would be a great tool to use. But since we don't have one of those for this and one won't fit, and we're just using the press here and just driving them in individually. So once we get all of these on here and pressed in, then we'll trim them all off and finish this seat off. All right, last rivet. Now that looks pretty awesome. So let's get these ground down and get started on them. Yeah, this is starting to look really, really sweet. In fact, I'm loving it. But these little stems here, we got to take these down just a little bit and just kind of give some clearance for the hardware and everything else to go through in there. Plus, I don't want too much stem sticking out of there. So I'm just going to take the grinder here. We'll just slowly knock all these down just a little bit. I'm just going to take a Scotch-Brite here and just kind of rough this up a little bit. Now, he said he wanted to leave those finish marks with the actual grinder in there, but I'm going to kind of dull it down just a little bit. A little bit of contrast to it, if you will. Nothing serious. Just kind of make it just a little bit, I don't know, maybe more random, if you will. I'm going to accent these dimple dies just a little bit. That'll look pretty cool. Well, what do you think? Well, you can drop me a comment below and tell me all about it. Now, you can absolutely see with something like this and the techniques that we use to actually create this custom seat pan, which I'm actually kind of proud of. I really like the way that it came out. But those techniques and everything shown in the video here can absolutely be applicable to other pieces, not just a custom chopper seat pan. So in the future, if you want to try and refine your skills and hone them into creating pieces like this, absolutely give it a shot, practice it out, and see what you can create and what you can come up with. It just takes a lot of time and practice. So that's all I have for this episode of the Fabrication series. I want to thank you guys very, very much for watching. As always, if you need to get in contact with me, you can drop a comment below. You can send me an email on the fabricationseries.com website. Hit me up on Instagram and Facebook. I always try to get back to everybody on those. So in the meantime, thanks again very much for watching. We'll see you guys on the next episode.